when people think about widowed parents, they often consider them one and the same with being a single parent. And to a degree, it's true. I am single and I am a parent. But there are some nuances that come along when there's grief and loss involved. And so I'm going to share with you some of the tips that kind of helped me navigate in the beginning after I experienced the loss of my husband back in 2019. Hi, my name is Alexis and welcome to Becoming All She, the place where women come to heal and find joy after loss. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you some of the lessons that I learned along the way when I became a widowed parent. Now, before I get started, I'm going to ask that you please do me the favor of liking this video and subscribing to this channel. This helps push this content out to other women who may also be in need. So, let's get started. Now, back in 2019, when Sterling first passed, the way that I dealt with my grief was to ignore it. Now, if you didn't check out my first video, I'll link it down below. I go a lot more in depth about it. But essentially, I felt really secure in knowing that I had a huge tribe around me. When my healing journey began and God called me out of my hometown of Miami and brought me across the country to Denver, the size of my tribe was more than cut in half. And that's when the weight of the responsibility of being a single parent kicked in. Now, when all of this first started happening, I began to notice that it was really impacting the dynamic between my son and I. Simple things like too much toothpaste on the toothbrush, or a sock on the floor, or an accidental spilled juice would send me into a complete meltdown. And I could see how it was impacting Mason. I could see the look of confusion and fear sometimes, like, why is mommy reacting like this? And for me, it was also scary because in my mind, it was like an out-of-body experience. I don't know if you've ever felt like this before, but it's like, I know I'm overreacting, but I also don't know how to reel this in right now. Like, I can't get a grip of this right now. That's real. And so while I wasn't quite sure why I was feeling that way, I knew that I needed to figure something out, not only for me, but for my son. And so I started doing some research, and what I discovered was what I was experiencing was actually mommy burnout. Yes, it's a real thing, and regardless of whether you're a widowed parent, a single parent, or have a partner, all moms or parents experience at some point in time some degree of burnout. It's just that widowed parents and single parents tend to be more susceptible to it and can sometimes experience it more intensely and more frequently. Now, for me, what my burnout looked like, on top of being very impatient, short-tempered, and irritable, I was incredibly fatigued. I was exhausted. Simple things like getting up and brushing my teeth or making breakfast, walking the dog felt like a marathon run. There was comfort in knowing that this is actually a thing and there's things that I can do about it. So, tip number 1 is understanding you're not alone. You are not alone in the burnout that you're feeling. You are not alone in the fatigue that you're feeling. You're not crazy. You're not crazy. Trust me, sis. It happens to the best of us. And the way to lean into that acceptance is to give yourself the permission and the grace to grow. The grace to know that, hey, I'm not going to hit the mark every time, but I'm doing the best I can, which leads me into tip number 2, which is releasing the need for perfection. Another thing that was contributing to my fatigue was, without notice, I was really trying to fill in the gap or stand in the shoes of my husband and be mom at the same time. So I was trying to be mom and dad, and that was exhausting. And it wasn't until one day I was deep in prayer and I found myself not only heartbroken, but angry. I was angry with God because I felt like This was something I could not protect my son from. I couldn't protect him from the pain and the heartache of losing a parent. And I couldn't understand why at such an early age, 3 years old, he had to experience that loss. And so I was pouring my heart out in prayer. God, I don't understand why this is happening. This is not fair. How could you do this to him? He's an innocent child. And the same way that my heart broke for my son, God in his infinite love and mercy reminded me that his heart breaks for the same thing too. And he brought me back to the scripture. And he reminded me of one of my favorite passages from the book of Jeremiah, where he talks about having plans for us, plans to prosper us and not to harm us, plans to give us a hope and a future. And he reminded me, he said, you see that? You remember that? The same way that I told you that I would do this for you, I'm going to do it for him too. This promise is true for your son too. Trust me, I know what he needs. I have made provision for him, and trust me. And so it was with that promise from my father to know that my son is already taken care of, I was able to release this need for perfection, this need to stand in the gap. And also there was a freedom in it. Like, hey, okay, I don't have to know how to throw a football. I don't have to wrestle with him today and break a nail. You know, there's other things that I can do to be present with my son that don't require me to play the role of two people at the same time. Tip number 3, boundaries. Now this one is a little bit touchy, but I promise you, in the long run, it really does help. Now, as I mentioned, Mason was 3 years old when his father passed. And for a child that young, the way that they express grief can be really big and really overwhelming to an adult that may not know. I mean, don't get me wrong, as adults, sometimes we don't know how to respond in the face of grief. So imagine trying to respond to a child. And so people around us in love did the best that they knew how to do, which was to gift. And so very quickly, my sweet angel learned that if he leveraged his grief, oftentimes that led to things that he wanted, like sweets and toys. And I'll be honest, there were times when I gave in too. But I began to notice a pattern, and I began to notice that our routines started slipping, and that the waves of grief or the episodes of grief show up when he wanted something. And so I started responding to him differently. Typically what that would look like, we might be in the store or we may be home and he's fighting me at bedtime. And, you know, I'd ask him like, why are you crying? What's wrong? I knew, but I wanted him to vocalize it or verbalize it. And he would tell me like, I miss daddy. But in the back of my mind, being mom, I knew that there was a little bit more to it than I just miss daddy. And so I started responding in a way that validated how he felt, but also set a firm boundary for how he should conduct himself. And so my response would sound something like, I know you miss daddy, and I miss daddy too. However, if daddy was here right now, he'd really want you to get some rest. Or if daddy was here right now, he'd want you to listen to mommy. He wouldn't want you eating sweets at 9 a.m. And what I quickly discovered when I started responding to him in that way consistently and firmly, his waves or episodes of grief became fewer and further in between. Now, don't get me wrong, Mason still has his episodes and I still respond to him in a way that provides comfort and validates how he feels. But in terms of how he expresses it and when he expresses it, that has certainly subsided. Tip number 4, community. Oh my goodness, I cannot express how valuable it is to be in community. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I'm originally from Miami, a very fast-paced city, and you have to stay on your toes. And so for me, I always had this wall up, this constant state of suspicious awareness, if you will. And it really created a barrier for me to learn and develop the skills that I needed to build community. And so after Sterling passed and I moved to a new city, and I had no choice but to make new friends and build a new community. It was challenging. It was very difficult. But God, again, in his sweet, kind wisdom and mercy, brought people into my life that wanted to support me, wanted to walk alongside me, just wanted to be present. And in that, I discovered this beautiful thing of friendship. I was able to create spaces where I could share and process and cry and laugh. And there was real healing that came out of that. And so it's really, really important that, especially as a widowed parent, that you have community around you that can babysit when you need to, or listen to you when you need to talk about your loved one, or just laugh with you and go to a comedy show. These things are really, really important, and they lend a hand to your healing process. Tip number 5 is reaching out. Now, this one goes hand in hand with community. Now, as I mentioned before, community is really important because it creates a safe space for you not to be alone and to just share and continue to grow. But sometimes you need a little bit of extra support. And that's exactly what happened to me. And so when I would have my moments of depression or moments of anxiety or even insomnia, it would impact the way that I would interact with Mason the next day. And so it's really important to reach out. If you feel like you're struggling with mental health issues, first you need to know that that's okay. It's normal. And there are people that want to help you. And the second part to that is there are also people who have walked that same path as you have and are open and willing and ready to serve you in creating some amazing action plan in order for you to begin operating in your purpose and really stepping into that joy. If this resonates with you, if that's something that you'd be interested in, I'll leave the link down in the bio below where you can schedule a free one-on-one breakthrough call with me, and we'll see what we can do together. In the meantime, remember, be good to yourself so you can be kind to someone else, and I'll see you in the next video.